Selectmen for today, and please all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I don't have my screen, so I have this I can put up as a flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic
for which it
stands, one nation,
under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, well, we have a very simple agenda here today to talk about how we move forward with the Island Avenue property. And I did invite Mark Skolenka here from Colliers to join us, and then Graham Curtis, who's the chair of the Island Avenue Future Use Committee. And so I think the purpose of today, the board got materials, which is just a kind of a conversation starter about possible next steps in the process that Al had sent to the board previously. And then also Colliers had just prepared its thoughts about how it could work with us in kind of a proposal form that I'd ask them to submit. So we haven't committed to Colliers or anything, but I thought it would be helpful, since Mark worked on the academy process, and, I just think it would be kind of good to hear his thoughts, how we had a chat, Al and I did, and Graham last week about, this is a little different situation. And try to get his thoughts, and so I thought maybe if the board is okay, I'd let Mark talk a few minutes about what his thoughts are based on our conversations last week and what he envisioned, and then we can have our own conversation about what we feel might be the right next steps for us. And then I guess Dave, I know, has been very involved, was involved with Academy, correct, Dave?
Yeah. I was very involved with that.
Yeah. So I will, if it's okay, I will turn it over to Mark, if that's all right with everybody, just to kick us off.
Sure. Well, thank you, Peggy. And again, it's great to see everybody this evening, see some familiar faces. It's been a while since we first started this conversation with Academy, looking back at some older documents. When I spoke with Peggy and Graham about the Island Ave approach, it seemed like a very similar process to what we engaged in with the Academy School parcel. Find the right developer for that property, and see what kind of options are available to all of us. I know that there's still interest in Madison, because over the course of the last 2 years, I've heard from several of the developers that proposed on Academy if there was still an opportunity for that development. And I told them nothing has been decided at this point, because I know at the time we had bounced between a community center or not. So I know there's genuine interest still in Madison for the development of housing. So following a similar process to what we did with Academy makes a lot of sense, with one slight difference. Because we know of at least 8 to 10 developers that are interested in Madison, the thought was to, in lieu of going to a request for qualifications, which is what we did for Academy, where you solicit qualification data on the developers and who do we even want to entertain as a proposer for the property. And then once we whittled that down to however many, issue a formal request for proposal where we get the actual development ideas and the financing structure for the opportunity. And talking to Peggy and Graham last week, it seemed to make sense based upon, again, we know that there's interest, we know the developers to reach out to, we'll still advertise to the wider network as we normally did, but we will issue just one RFP and still collect some qualification data, but get the proposals right up front, because again, we know there's still interest in the parcel. So, we mapped out a schedule that could get us to where we've got proposals in hand by the middle of May. There'd be a review period, obviously, workshops, get a developer selected potentially on or about the middle of July, have a negotiation agreement period, ultimately getting to a referendum in November. So it all seems to make sense from a timeline perspective. The other thing that's obviously different with this particular property versus Academy was the occupants that are currently there. OLM. Academy was empty, so there was nothing to deal with regards to that. But now with OLM being the current partner with the town, there was interest from Peggy and Graham to continue to engage OLM in the process as well. So the RFP would also go to OLM to see how they would propose to.
Well, and also any entity.
Or any, yeah, any.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this wouldn't be,
Right.
oh, you have to do development. It's more whoever's interested in buying this property, and then we put parameters about the type of information that we would need to do an economic analysis from that.
Right. And in looking at the draft RFP that was developed, that was made clear that it's open to any type of development option. So if there was another charter school or another institution that wanted to throw their hat into the ring, they certainly could. So again, the fact that we had a process established for Academy that I think worked okay, Dave. I mean, you could argue, or I guess you could tell me if it didn't, if there were steps that would have been different. We certainly would want to make those adjustments, in this process. But because we already have that path and plan laid out, it seemed to make sense to follow a similar path for Island Ave. There's a lot of information that's already there for the site, which I know Graham or whoever wrote that RFP. I don't know, Graham, did you write it or your committee?
Our
or Dave?
committee did, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, there's a lot of information that's already there, a lot of backup information that'll be great for the developers to get their hands on so they know what's there in terms of hazardous materials or other sorts of deeds or issues with the site. So I think you're all in a good spot to get this out. Again, my plan would be to get it out by the middle of March. Could be sooner, but at the latest, the middle of March. And again, have proposals in hand by the middle of May for review. So Peggy, I don't know if that covered enough or you wanted.
Well, I think that the other thing that, it highlights is that if we were to follow this kind of timeline where we would just have everybody on the same track who's interested in the building and the property, they're all on the same timeline, and then we would just start working through it. In theory, we could actually potentially try to get this on the ballot in November. Now, there's a lot of complications with this because of the right of first refusal and that the whole air search piece that could hiccup our timeline. But it does at least offer, a possibility of doing that. And I think the positive piece of that is to at least go for that, is that potentially theoretically could be when the school's going up for vote as well. And it's nice to see an inflow and an outflow, right, on the ballot. So and it shows progress, because that really ultimately was part of the school renewal plan, was closing Island Avenue and then rotating into this new plan. So it kind of, I think, sends a nice story to the town. It offers some economic relief depending on what we get forward in terms of proposals. But it's all conditional upon us being able to resolve some of these legal issues also on the property. So I guess with that, any questions from the board? I know this is the first you just got his proposal earlier, which really is just highlighting kind of what Al, had drawn up before about involving a third-party facilitator for this, because I do think that we also need to make sure we have a lot of public communication and opportunities for the community to weigh in. And I think using an outside advisor can be invaluable for that.
So actually, that's a great segue into my first question. Are we satisfied that we've done all of our diligence to determine that selling the property is what the taxpayers want? I know that when Graham did his report, he mentioned difficulties in getting a lot of public engagement on this. And, we went through a different but similar instance with Academy, where we thought we had discerned the mood of the town and were quickly corrected. So I want to make sure that we don't repeat that mistake and press forward as if we know what everybody wants to do. So I'll put it out there to the selectmen, and then Mark, if you've got guidance for us on how we can be more comfortable moving forward with this.
I'd like an opportunity to chime in too after the selectmen, if that's okay.
Sure.
Scott, you're muted.
Scott.
Yeah, so I mean, maybe I could jump in. So the I mean, we didn't get much public outreach, but everyone was kind of on the same page, either school or residential. I don't think anybody seriously considered any other option than residential or the school. And to be honest, I think most of the feedback I perceived was for the school, but I don't know if that was, people were a little more vocal who had a particular strong opinion on that. I did get a couple letters and some other people who felt strongly that the tax, could be, should be strongly, tax revenue should be strongly considered. We discussed doing we did a poll through the website. We talked about doing like a statistically significant poll, but we felt until we really had options, from the RFP process to actually say, this is this and this is this, it would be kind of just a generic, what do you want? And we knew it'd come back and say school or residential. I don't think anybody with the zoning restrictions also, I don't think it was really possible to do anything other than those. And I don't know if anybody has a stomach if the selectmen would support an open space scenario as an option, but I think that was, everyone on the committee felt we really should get some revenue out of this property. And that was kind of our charge.
Well, okay, so I mean, just to put all my cards on the table, I don't have anybody petitioning me for some alternate scenario, but the folks who were really behind the community center at Academy, we've really made no progress there. Plausibly, this building is has a simpler path to becoming a community center, and if they're inclined to come out and support that, I'd rather know that now than deep into the process of selling the property.
Implying
fair enough.
that,
Go ahead, Scott.
just implying that, what if they're interested in that facility as a community center? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just, if they see that, if there's an unspoken desire there, I think it would behoove us to flush that out sooner rather than later.
Well, I guess the question I had, Peggy, sorry, I was trying to speak on mute and I didn't realize I was on mute. And I should be very good at this, by the way. We've been Zooming for a year now, so I should be very proficient. What is our thinking about town meetings or a public hearing or something where the public could virtually come and, ask, make versus buy questions, lease versus buy or whatever we want to call it, to the committee, to Dave, to Mark, whoever. But is there an opportunity to create a forum where the public is able to come and discuss and provide input and give direction in advance of the RFP going out? An idea.
Well, I don't think that's a bad idea. And the idea is to solicit the public. And the question is, where do we slot that in along the process, right? So maybe we do start as we're finalizing the RFP. We would need to do that quickly, but we could easily hold some sort of virtual town hall on this just to solicit input. But let's face it, this has been out there for years now between.
Yeah, I mean, we did.
And,
we did have a public hearing, and we put it in the newspaper and said, please come to us. And, we begged people to do it, and we got like 11 people at the meeting. We just couldn't generate any, maybe.
We understand. We understand.
No, and it is one of these things until it's like right in front of them, and they're having to vote on it, is when people might pay attention. But I think Scott, that check the box again, one last time to make sure that is out there. I think we could certainly schedule something in March before we officially launch the RFP to get input from the public about the RFP. We could do that. I don't see what the downside of that is, right?
I mean, and maybe that's an opportunity to share the details of the RFP so that you're making that a little more public too,
right?
And transparent.
Right. And one thing I want to say is that, this, some of the recommendations I was making when I was talking to Mark was that, this is an opportunity to, you talk about the town not wanting to sell the property. I mean, a long-term, some sort of lease proposal is also an option on the table, right of first refusal for the town, getting that kind of feedback and thinking about, you know, the ability to kind of at one point maybe get that property back if we were to want to do that. If we go down the condo development route, that obviously eliminates any flexibility. Once it's gone, it's gone. But, you know, those are the types of things that we can put into the RFP to make sure that we, you know, have all these different options on the table to evaluate. And then I think the
Well,
other
I was
thing,
going to ask that
Yeah.
is it written in such a way, Peggy, where it is sort of open-ended to some extent, where, you know, we can foster some creative ideas and different types of solutions versus just the traditional development?
Well, I thought that was the point of this, the committee.
yeah, well,
That's been working for a long time.
well, they've drafted it. Yeah. And I think,
Well, they
yeah, I mean,
fleshed out
Correct.
the possibilities, right? Graham, am I,
That is correct. We had 22 meetings and, you know, that was the,
do you,
but I guess that in terms of the actual document and how we structure that, we'll all have the opportunity to weigh into that. I think, like, what kind of parameters are in the document. They started with the draft. We'll get advice from Mark. How do we craft this so we have clear, you know, we have clear information to make good decisions from when we get these proposals, right? So we're comparing apples to apples as we look at these different proposals. And I think that, you know, to me is worth having everything laid out clear. And then, you know, ultimately, you know, depending on what we get back, we as a board, we don't have to put one question out there. We could offer two options possibly if we felt strongly that it was not, there was nothing clearly standing out as a winner, right? And so you can offer multiple options on the ballot for the town to vote on.
Can I ask Graham a question real quick? So Graham, just, you know, as you guys went through your 22 meetings, you know, you mentioned sort of the interest in revenue generation kind of came forward at the end, or at least that's a recommendation. So was there parameters, you know, upon, you know, how you defined what revenue generation was, or was it fairly open-ended in the sense that, you know, it could accommodate a lease, or does it have to be development, I guess is the point.
no, I mean, we worked up financial models and looked at various scenarios with leases and, you know, sales and tax. You know, I mean, a big part of it is until you actually get someone with a purchase price, you don't know what, you know, the
Right.
lease are. And even more complicated was with the payment in lieu of taxes. How do you guarantee that? You know, so until you get someone actual proposals, and we did meet with OLM people, and, you know, they expressed their interest, but they weren't ready to commit.
Well, I just remember going through, and Mark, you can attest to this, right? When we went through the academy process, you know, the range of options that came through were, you know, anywhere from 250,000 to, I don't know, 1.2, I'll say, or whatever the
Yep,
number
that
was.
was it.
But it was a, wow, it's pretty good.
Yep.
Significant range,
Right.
you know, as opposed to, you know, who knows what we're going to get here, but.
Yeah, so we did. Yeah, I mean, we did create a financial spreadsheet that would look at all the options, including leases, the sales,
Okay.
you know, the school, and looked at the present value of what that would be and the option. One of the discussions was what's the duration that you choose to look at that, because, you know, 5 or 10 years or longer, because our assumption was that the school would probably pay more money up front because the school was probably more valuable to them than it would be to a developer, but that the developer would probably generate more tax revenue long term because the value of what he would put in place. Now, if the school puts in, now there's a lot of maintenance needed on the school. So if the school bought it for like $1.5 million, that would kind of reset the value, the appraised value much lower than what we suggest. So we don't know what that is, because the school's going to need about $2.5 million, $3 million just to keep it running long term. So again, we had these discussions and we kept going around and around. It's like, well, what if? And we said, at the end of the day, we have to go out to RFP to know what the real numbers are. You know, because
Right.
But the
And
qualifying
everything was-
factor was revenue at the end of the day. It wasn't what type of revenue, what source of revenue, how it came in, right? It was
Right,
just,
it was
we
a-
want to see revenue for the property.
Right, we had a spreadsheet that created and moved it back to the present value to compare apples to apples. That said, we didn't say that was going to be the ultimate decider. It was just going to be a factor that we needed to compare. You know, we understood that people might not want multifamily homes no matter what it was, but we wanted to have some basis of comparison was it, how much over the course of, years? I mean, that said, if 25 condos are there and they're at X dollars, we know what that's going to generate over the long term. And that's locked in. That's a sure thing.
Sure.
You know what I mean? The school, because some of the uncertainties with the school, and what they're paying and payment of lieu of taxes, there's a lot more unknowns. But the consensus was the school was the path of least resistance, and giving a vote option, the town would probably pick the school if it was even remotely close, or even, half the value of the thing, because people desired the school, the neighborhood, and,
Well, it's less risky, right? Because that's what it's always been, I guess. So from a resident standpoint, people might think, well, this is less risky, but I do think there's a lot of appetite right now for tax revenue as well. So
I'd like to ask Mark a question about crafting the RFP language. Mark, since one or more nonprofits are likely to be interested in submitting a proposal, how do you craft the language setting a payment in lieu of taxes? How do you create that understanding that the town is going to be looking for an ongoing stream, which I'm assuming is roughly equivalent to what they would pay in taxes if they were a taxable entity?
Al, we did the same thing for Academy. We listed it as one of the options for financing, right? We said, there's complete disposition, there's ground lease, or payment in lieu of taxes, and you propose, by the way, nobody proposed payment in lieu of taxes,
Right.
By the way. Everybody, the Hope Institute proposed a ground lease, but they didn't offer what their offer would be. Everybody else was either between, like Scott said, $200,000 or $1.2 million. But you list that as one of the options for revenue stream is the payment in lieu of taxes, and let them propose on what their plan would be. I just want, Al, I got to say one other thing to Bruce's point. Now, I will reach out to the developers, and they will all ask me if there's opposition to this property, because they all, I was telling this to Peggy and Al, Peggy, Al, and Graham the other day. It takes money to put together a proposal. Right? They're going to have architects. They're going to put together time and plans and schemes, and Graham knows because he does this as we do. I mean, time is money, and while there's still interest in the town, to Bruce's point, they're going to want to make sure that there's not massive opposition to the property either, because if they spend, $25,000 on putting a package together, they'd like to see, they like to see a development happen. May not be theirs, but at least there's a shot, right? The second thing is, I know you've got the 7 ideas for what you would want, in whether it's private or public schools or not public schools, public housing or residential housing. The developers will dictate what makes the most sense for their pro forma, right? Because for Academy, Al, remember, we wanted mixed use, Dave. You remember, right? We wanted mixed use. We wanted, offices and this and that. But we said, you tell us what you want. And every single one of them came back with housing, because this is what the market dictates for the property. So my guess is with Island Ave, it's going to be overwhelmingly residential anyways, right? For the developers, you're not going to see a lot of, I think, other options for that property.
And you're also restricted because of the deed restrictions, right? So you couldn't put commercial businesses or facilities into on the property. Right.
And, again, so they're going to propose what makes the most sense for them, as a for-profit. For the nonprofits, they're going to propose, like the Hope Institute, and the Women's Institute partnership. They're going to make a pitch. It's not going to be as lucrative, but, it'll at least be an option for you to consider. So anyways, I just wanted to respond. Oh, and the other thing, by the way, is I remember, Dave, and you remember this, when we were talking about Academy as a residential parcel, those that were opposed to that were saying, wait for Island Ave. That makes more sense because it's not downtown, right? And why would you take this, the land and the park and the fields and whatever, and we could use that for something else.
Yeah, they were suggesting almost like a horse trade where we would give the developer the right to develop Island in exchange for them helping to develop Academy into more of a community asset.
Right. So maybe Bruce, that's sort of the mindset is, okay, let Academy be Academy. We'll figure that part out. But Island Ave is the parcel that really should be into the residential development, zone. So maybe there won't be as much opposition.
I think that might be a good time for me to just piggyback very briefly. And again, I apologize if I'm jumping ahead of anybody, but I have had a concern about separating Island Avenue from the rest of our assets and trying to tackle that as a one-off. And so we're underway now with this comprehensive facilities study, which is going to lead us towards a comprehensive facilities master plan. And so we're really close to getting into that process. And, you know, in my opinion, I think that process should really precede a decision on Island Avenue. We may arrive to the very same conclusions that Graham has come to, but I think we'll do it in a way that the public has participated in and everybody at least has had an opportunity to give input into like the comprehensive strategy for all our town facilities. And I think we'd lower any potential opposition to development by going through that process. And I'm not talking about a simple, hey, public hearing about Island. I'm talking about what are we doing with the surf club? What are we doing with Academy? What are we doing with, you know, Jeffrey after Jeffrey gets no longer needed? So, you know, that's been a concern of mine. So I wanted to convey that that would still be a concern of mine. And then the second thing which was brought up is, so I deal with obviously all the development in town, and every time there's a multifamily housing development proposed, people say, well, is the developer going to put in affordable housing? You know, they should really put in affordable housing. I agree. But is the town going to do affordable housing? I mean, so if we're going to be the developer, I think we should ask ourselves a serious question about whether or not we have a responsibility to try to develop affordable housing in town and not necessarily just go out to a generic RFP that's going to return the most dollars to the town. So I think we have to really think deeply about what our goals are. And so revenue generation is certainly a goal, but we probably have other goals for our community that we should consider alongside that. And so depending if we do go out to RFP for this, I'd like to seriously think about doing what other towns have done and either go after, you know, very specific senior housing proposal or very specific affordable housing proposal, at least have a dialogue about that before issuing any RFP.
Have maybe a criteria in there or something.
I mean,
In the RFP.
When I see other towns successfully go develop projects that contain affordable housing, they're specifically targeting that use. They're not a generic RFP and pitting a kind of not-for-profit developer against the for-profit developer. They've made a conscious decision to go down in that direction.
Yeah, which Guilford did. Yeah, Guilford did their project on the south near the tracks.
Right.
I wanted to just jump in. I agree with Dave, and I was actually wanted to say that before, is that we've gone through this process now with the facilities review. And one of the outcomes seems to be that we need more space. And okay, well, we'll just stick it into Academy. We'll put these offices in Academy. That's come up in discussion. And so I guess my question is, how do we know, you know, how do we compare Island versus Academy? Because maybe Island would be a more reasonable and economical way to accommodate the needs for more space. So I agree with Dave in that I think we need to look at all of the buildings, which would include Island.
I mean, I think this really, I mean, I think in an ideal world, yes, we would include all of this. We would have done this a while ago and looked at all the different parts and tried to come up with this facilities plan. My concern is that we have a tenant who every year we have to go through an excruciatingly difficult lease process with. That also needs to know their future, right? Because they're enrolling children and people are making school plans for their kids. So we have that kind of timeline to think about. We also have a lot of significant capital needs coming up. And so I do also hear from the community about we shouldn't be adding properties or holding on to properties. We should be, you know, trying to rationalize our properties and help pay for some of the improvements in the ones that we have remaining. So I feel like there's a fiscal pressure building here. So, and I would be concerned about the timeline on all that. That's all. I feel like we have a hard time making decisions in this town. And so that would mean that we would be able to somehow come, you know, together with this plan, and have the, lease situation resolved and have all these things come to a head, I just envision that taking so long. And this property, I just felt, from what I've heard as a citizen, my kids were at Island Avenue, and the drumbeat was, we got to cut schools. We're closing Island. It's the most valuable property. We can generate revenue and it'll help pay for the other schools. That was the drumbeat that was put out when they decided to close Island Avenue. So I think, do we want to pivot from that and kind of go down a whole step back and take a whole reflection? I mean, I don't know. I'm just concerned we're not making decisions and moving on and solving problems. So I don't disagree. That is the best way to do it, right? Because I agree. I would love to have that more academic review, and part of it is I haven't seen the facility study either, and that's going to be presented on March 1st, right? A kind of what's coming out of that and what step you guys are in that process.
So, I mean, if I think Dave and Aaron are bringing up a valid point. If we are literally days away from being able to have a conversation about that new information, it's certainly, that's not going to delay this process at all.
Right.
Certainly at this point in the process, we've not made any decisions that we can't back away from, and it would be a shame to come to the realization that we really do need that space as a town, and all of a sudden now it's not available to us. So, and the data's changed. I think, Peggy, you are right. The proceeds from that property and the ongoing tax collections from it were advertised as an offsetting number for the school's capital expense, the addition of all that stuff. We're looking at probably a couple of $1 million at an $80 million project. I'm not sure it actually swings the decision. So I would argue we should give a chance for the facility study to come out and talk about it before we make any hard and fast decisions. We can still sort of move forward on this path at the same time. And then should we decide that we need to go in a different direction because of the facility study, we can do that when that time comes, if it even comes.
Well, my thinking was our next regular meeting is the 9th, I think. And so we're having the presentation on the 1st.
In a special meeting, right?
Yeah, which is a special meeting to talk about the fields. My thinking was by the 9th to be ready to kind of like launch whatever we wanted to do. But I hear what you're saying. Look, I'm more of a, let's plan this, let's look at everything, and, but I just struggle with not, being able to make decisions and move on. And that one, I just felt always was a property that there just seemed to be consensus that it was not going to remain within the portfolio for the town. That was what I'd always just heard from previous.
I agree. I think that has,
from the public.
I think that's the way probably most people have felt over the last couple of years. So,
but I feel like now we have this new information, which is that if we require additional space, if that is the determination from the study that we just, that's just been completed, and we're going to put a $14 million project in front of the voters for referendum, when perhaps there's another option that would meet the needs of identified in that study that's better for the town. And I'm not saying that's what I think, but I'm just saying, we can't look at things in a vacuum. I mean, in silos.
I agree. I mean, I don't want to look at them.
And I hear what you're saying, Peggy. I'm not, I think you make a valid point as well. And I'm not trying to argue it. I'm just, having gone through the process of being on the facilities review. Okay, well.
No, and there's merit to having a master plan. I think what I get slightly concerned about is the analysis paralysis, where Island has been on the table for multiple years. Academy's been on the table for 15 years now.
But I think that was I think Bruce's point, or maybe it was Tom, I don't know, when before the committee was formed, like like, no offense, Graham, because your committee was very useful, but you know, it's like, that's what we do, is we study things.
Right, but that's sort of counter to the point that you guys just made. So I guess,
But
I think we just have to be conscious of, either we make some decisions or do we continue to study it. Now, I think even studying it further through a master plan may or may not give us and yield us any additional information. I mean, different than what the committee just told us. And we did put the committee in place for a reason too. So let's not lose sight of that.
well, it will be different than the study, because the plan is taking the study results one step
Integrated.
further,
Yeah,
right? And making a plan.
no, it's definitely an integrated plan, no doubt about it. Yep.
Right. So yeah, I think we're getting a little ahead of the data on that, but I think if Dave and Aaron are maybe hinting that there's going to be some new information that we're likely to see, I think we probably deserve to consider that.
And I've been clear with Peggy about this when I've talked to her about this. So the information that you're going to get on March 1st isn't going to lead you to like the light bulb moment to make a strategic decision. It's just a lot of data, but what it is going to illustrate,
450 pages of data.
We tried to push them.
450 pages of data.
Yeah.
But it is going to illustrate that we have a lot of facilities and in various states of utilization, some not at all, some minimally, and then others very, very much so. And so I think it's going to scream that we really need to do this strategic, comprehensive analysis. And so I think that's what you're going to get on Monday. I don't think you're going to get, here's what we should do with Academy or anything like that. You're not going to get there yet.
Is it really 450 pages?
Yes, it is.
Mm-hmm.
So has this been distributed to the board?
Not yet.
No, we have a meeting tomorrow to finalize it, right?
I think so, yeah.
There's an
Do you have a
executive
copy of
summary
it?
though, right?
Yes.
There's an executive summary.
Yeah, well, like we've been
Scott's
begging
been
for
pushing
it,
it.
trust me.
But I do think though, that all of these, it seems like all of these studies are starting to come together. Like we have the Madison Youth and Family Services study now saying that,
They need space.
which is, saying we need this service in the town. And then we have Madison Youth and Family Services saying we need more space. So it's like, I feel like things are starting to come together in a way that we can possibly make some real conclusions.
Wait, well, before we drift too far away from Dave's other point, I just want to circle back on it. And that is us, the Board of Selectmen, having with some clarity what our priority is for that property. Is it a financial priority? Is it some other priority? I think that we need to be on the same page as the board, and I think we need to be clearly transmitting that intent out to the public. So I'm not sure I'm ready to jump on using that as affordable housing, that particular piece of land, but I do believe it's worthy of consideration and agreement amongst the board.
I want to be conscious that we're not discounting the amazing work that our committee did as well, right? I mean, at the end of the day, they're coming to us with some thought and recommendations, and we need to make sure we're listening.
Right. And I think that that's where I feel like kind of this discussion is, I think it's important that we review, like look at the facility study, kind of step back and look at all the assets and what role this plays into it. But I feel like the community message has been pretty loud and clear that people see this property as a revenue generator. Now, whether that's through a school or whether that's through property, if you sit there and compare Academy versus Island, I would say Island's going to cost a lot more to renovate, but you're going to get a lot more long-term tax revenue out of, Academy's going to be more expensive to renovate, but Island's going to be a lot better opportunity for long-term tax revenue. So you're kind of, and this is the discussion we should be having. It's a healthy discussion. So, and it is good. It is falling in timeliness with the first phase of the facility study. We'll call it phase 1 of the facility study, right? Which is more data gathering. And so maybe we have this, have our meeting on Monday, and then we have this again on the agenda for our next meeting and to talk about it. I mean, there's no urgency to get this on the ballot in November. I think though it is, I think it's a nice, I'm just eager to move the ball forward on things, move the ball forward, try to make it, because it'll help us make decisions on our facilities if we can take one of them out of the picture, right? Every time we can eliminate one, it makes us focus on what's left. But to your point, we've started, we're spending a lot of money on this study. And so let's hear what comes out on Monday. And there might be some good questions that we can have them go back to the drawing table focused on this issue for us to help us make sure that we check the box, right?
Sure. Can I shift gears a little bit? And this may not be answerable by anybody on the call.
Can we stop you, or do you have
to? No, you can't.
Is it on the agenda?
Is it part of the agenda, Bruce?
I'm assuming that as part, if we presume for a moment that selling the property is the way we end up going, that we're going to have to offer the first refusal to the heirs. Is that a safe assumption right now?
I would assume that, yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
okay.
Yeah.
So presuming
whoever
that
they may be.
so presuming that the heirs will have to be offered that right of first refusal. I guess the question is, how do we know that our best offer is actually a fair market offer for the property? How do we benchmark what we're receiving in for offers, right? Because if everybody came in and said, I'm going to make numbers up, but we'll give you $100,000, and then we have to go to the heirs and say, well, you can buy it for $100,000. That wouldn't seem like a good deal for the town. And then second to that is, would the offer also obligate the heirs to follow through on the development project of the offer that they're countering or they're first refusing? So in other words, can the heirs buy
you're
it?
Right. Buy it and then sit on it, and there's
And then sit on it, or turn around and resell it for a higher price?
I mean, that's going to be a legal question on that second piece. Absolutely. I mean, in the first piece, we don't have to, the way the RFP, ultimately it's our decision and then the town's decision, right? So if it's an unsatisfactory offer that we think is below what the value is to the town, because that's part of this, is we should be looking at the value to the town versus the value of it to somebody else, right? And the facility study kind of is the value to the town, right? What role it would play. So, we don't have to, as a board, choose anything.
So yeah, no, I understand that. And of course, it's not going to be as black and white as 100,000 versus 5 million. It's, it's going to be much more incremental.
No, I mean, but the right of first refusal piece, is going to be an important legal thing about what the purchase and sale agreement would have in it, I guess. And, because I would think it just says the right to purchase the property. I would think it's terms and conditions, right? Not just terms.
So that's good. That's going to be probably a question we're going to want to get answered or get guidance on. And then I'm sure there's a whole bunch of questions in the same vein that we haven't even thought of.
Yes.
That we're going to need advice on.
What is the timing on that, Peggy? Do you have any idea on the air search and all of that?
I have not had an update. I think Graham had the last contact. They had not received the response. I don't think yet.
I mean, I think our attorney went back and asked them for documentation.
Yeah.
To prove that I don't believe they've gotten any, but they certainly appear to have, to be, half sisters of the heir. Why they didn't come forward when it was in probate, I don't know.
So I think that they still would need to demonstrate that they're the heirs.
Yeah, I think it would do some kind of DNA testing or something like that. But they appear to be 99%, the rightful heir. And I don't think we've come across any other people. They, their ranking as opposed to second cousins or third cousins are way superior.
Graham, I think our attorney, Brian Lima, also suggested that Connecticut law is a bit hazy about half brothers and half sisters. And whether or not they're really considered heirs. So there
Yeah,
are heirs out there, but it may not be the bunch that's claiming to be the heirs.
Yeah, I talked to an attorney friend of mine. He said that the way they look at it, Corey does this way. He does this kind of specific for, and they would be, you know, based on your percentage, they're like 25% DNA matches. So that's much better than a cousin kind of thing. So he felt pretty solid that if they are in fact who they say they are, that they would be the strongest heirs.
Okay.
Yeah,
But I
so
don't
make
think
a
we've had any
soap opera
correspondence.
out of that whole conversation.
My head spins when I talk about it, but
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, that is gonna be something that we would have to flush out a little bit more over the next couple of months. And, you know, they're probably just waiting to see what we're gonna do first, you know, in terms of the process and before they, you know, go through an effort to demonstrate something. So,
we had there was a perception, I think, that they would prefer to maintain a school, that they were an advocate of the school use.
I think that's stated in the letter, yeah, because
Yeah.
that was kind of the intentions of the original princess who had deeded
Right.
it to the school. I mean, it was sold though for an amount of money. That was a reasonable market.
Yeah,
value.
yeah, $25,000.
So it wasn't like they donated it.
No,
So, well, those are all things that are going to have to be flushed out. And you know, I think so. It sounds like our path forward then is we have a facilities review, and then we put this on the agenda again at our next meeting and see if we've kind of decided we want to move forward. You know, I think in terms of this process, I think it would be helpful at least for the board to say, if we do go forward, this is the process we would want to undertake, right? And I think that's something, it would be good to resolve that so that, you know, if we're trying to figure out, do we want to hold on to this for a while and wait, you know, until we know the facilities thing, or maybe we decide, you know, a month from now, we do want to move forward. At least we've decided what that process is going to be.
Sure, sure. Hey, Graham, one quick question about your draft, and I
Yep.
recognize that it's a draft. On page 7, you have just a really quick paragraph that says the town of Madison intends to include the residents of the town in the selection process. Were you talking about a town meeting in that comment, or were you expecting that we would create a committee of residents that would then participate in some sort of selection process?
I think the intent was that ultimately the town would have to go to a town vote.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, our committee expressed a desire to be involved, but you know, obviously that's optional. The selectmen will make the decision and the town will have to make the final vote.
Okay.
The other thing, Bruce, just to add to that, because again, that was language in the academy, was the plan to have workshops, right? To have the developers come in and do a presentation to any resident that wants to, either whether it's remote or in person, and have their voices be heard. Because remember, you know, Al and Dave, there were a lot of people that came and spoke about the various options. And I think the intent was to try and, you know, okay, if there are 5 legitimate proposals that you're considering, and everybody gets up and says, I don't want that, I don't want that, I don't want that, you may want to consider not selecting that option.
Yeah,
I think that was the intent of that.
I didn't say earlier, but I think we did do a pretty good process for the RFP last time. So if we get to a point where we're comfortable issuing an RFP and the developers feel like there's a reasonable shot that the development proposal will go forward, I think the process we did last time worked very well. I think the key is we need to be in a better place before we start the process. Because I do feel like at some point the development community is going to say, I'm not wasting my time on this anymore. Madison's got to get their act together first.
Yeah, it's fair. That's a very fair point, Dave.
And can I ask one question just to help me formulate some thoughts on this? What have been the discussions around, you know, a longer term lease for a school? So rather than a 1-year lease, you know, multiple years going forward.
That was put on the table originally. There was a proposal of a 3-year lease, but that was not put forward.
I mean, I think in terms of, you know, my understanding coming into this, you know, just last year was that there was, you know, no interest in anything. We barely got 1-year renewal out of, moving forward with that. And I think there was just resistance to, tying our hands on what we can do with the property. So if we feel like, if the board were to say, you know what, let's spend the next 2 or 3 years figuring out this master plan, then, I would say, well, then we should go back to the school and negotiate a 3-year lease, because this annual renewal thing is painful. But that's something I think we need to get our arms around. Is that process really going to change where we want to go with with the school,
When Aaron and I were negotiating with the school, I certainly came away with the impression that they would love a long-term lease. It gives them predictability, both in terms of having access to the school. It would give them predictability in terms of their cost, their rent. And so, respecting Dave's earlier comment, I think if we as a board decide it's not time to pull the trigger on starting this RFP process, my impression is the school would be very interested in a 3 or 5 year lease.
Yeah, I think it starts to get complicated when you look at the physical space and the infrastructure investment that it may require. Also, I think that if we were to consider a long-term arrangement, we would, just out of necessity, have to put it out to bid. We would have to give other organizations the opportunity to bid on it. So it sounds really simple, but when you start to get into it, it starts to get complicated. And then I'll just add in, we are unfortunately a government much like other governments. If we put this one to bed for 3 years, I'm afraid we would forget about it for 2.5.
Yeah.
So
well, hence my, we're going to have, if we postpone this much longer, we're going to be facing that lease again.
Yeah.
Deadline. So that's the problem. That's why can we take a month to sort this out a little bit more? Yeah, but we can't take 6 months.
Agreed.
So,
but why couldn't you? I mean, why couldn't you give them, instead of, I'm not saying 5 years, why don't you just give them another year? Why don't you do 1 more year? And then you've bought yourself plenty of time.
You weren't part of the negotiation process.
Well,
I think.
I mean, that's why
and you didn't go to the virtual town meeting, by the way. So
only because I have one of my 4 other nightly meetings that week.
Well, it was a wonderful 2 hours of watching people cook dinner.
Don't worry, Dave. You probably wouldn't have got in anyway.
I heard that, yeah.
So,
well, I'm sorry.
I have to go do dance pickup. I apologize. I have to jump off.
Yeah.
So I'm being a little vocal, but only to share an outsider perspective. I know you guys have been thick in this. So thank you for letting me talk.
Yeah.
And I think, Dave, if we were to have some big revelation that said it does make sense to extend the lease to give us more time, if that were to happen in 6 months, it would be light years ahead of the schedule that we did this year.
Right.
So.
Yeah, but I think it just.
I'm not saying it's likely or I'm not putting any value on that. I'm just saying that us taking a month doesn't impact our ability to exercise all of the options.
I agree. Totally agree. I think a month is not a big deal at all. But I think if we get into 6 months or a year or multiple years, then I think we're kicking the can.
Right.
Right.
The nice thing is you have a process already established. You can start it whenever you want.
Right. Okay. Well, I think that if, at a minimum, I would like to get, feedback and that everybody's comfortable with the process for the next meeting, so that we have, this is the process. When we're ready to pull the trigger, we can pull the trigger, but let's step back and see, where the facilities things comes out. So, okay. All right. So I guess thank you for everything and all your hard work. And
Peggy, there's one member of the public who would like to have public comment.
Public comment. Okay. Yes.
So Gus Horvath has his hand raised.
I forgot that we have public comment on this agenda.
I bet you're surprised that I'm commenting.
Very surprised.
Okay, I see the smile on Mark's face.
Trust me, we
remember-
noticed your hand raised.
One of the things you're watching you guys, and I tuned in late because we were eating dinner. I didn't see the very beginning. You're tying yourself up into a bag with all the things you're trying to consider. And one of the things we did the first time around with Academy Street was we made the decision to open the RFP and say, what can you give us? We green lighted it. Said, tell us anything you think you could do with the building. And then we took it to the public, and the public handed our butts to us because they didn't like some of the commercial things, or they didn't like this, that, or the other thing. But the point I'm trying to make is we didn't put a red light up. We said, give us anything you think you could do with the building because we don't want to miss anything is essentially what we wanted to do. And I had no problem with the heckling that some of us got because they didn't like some of the proposals. As Mark said, people got up and said, we don't want to do that. We wanted to do that. We didn't know that until we presented it. And, we ended up going out a second time with an RFP just for the building itself, because the bulk of the negative was using the fields. And of course, that's where the developers were going to make their money, was on the open land building new building. So, those are the things that we thought about. And I have an advantage over you guys because years and years ago, I was in real estate, and I've also been trained at the college level in real estate appraisal. So I have a better feel for this type of thing than the average person does. I never practiced it because I didn't do it for that. I did it because I was elected to the Board of Assessment Appeals and I wanted to know what I was doing. But anyhow, think seriously over the next month or 6 weeks or 8 weeks or whatever it is about the whole idea of opening it up and saying, what is out there for us to review? Then, as Mark said, have a workshop or a poll or whatever the thing you think is most reasonable for you to do, and have people comment on it. And that's the way. Let the public narrow it down. You guys should not be narrowing the thing down because somebody's going to get up at a meeting and say, "Did you consider this? Did you consider that? Did you consider the other thing?" And you can tell them right up front, "This is all the things we considered, and this was presented. These are the only things we have to give you." Amen.
Thank you, Gus. I appreciate that. I mean, I think we kind of did that through the island committee. I guess the piece that was off the table was town use. I don't think that was really part of your process, right? Because that was not part of the charge.
Right. So it came up from time to time, but the consensus was, that we're going down that path with Academy. We can't consider that. It just gets way too complicated, and right. And we thought, because this doesn't have any historic preservation issues,
right?
This would be easier to develop than the baggage of the historic preservation, stuff. Also, our perception was that the study, which we tried to get a copy of, but it wasn't ready yet, that this building is pretty tired, and that it's not a beautiful pre-war building with great bones. It's a post-war school that's lived its useful life and is probably pretty tired. The mechanicals are pretty well shot. I'm assuming that 8 years ago we looked at the study and it was pretty tired then. So we're assuming that the results of that study you're going to get next month is saying this building is pretty tired and it really isn't much value to reuse. And if you need space, there is space in the library. It's not open yet, but I think I know that's part of the study what open space you have, but
right,
there's a lot of rooms for lease at the library.
Right. Okay, and Lauren, you said there's somebody else, or was it just Gus?
Was it?
No, it was just Gus.
Okay, all right. Okay, great. Well, I guess, can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All
Second.
Right. All in favor? Aye. All right, great.
Aye.
To be continued.
Thanks, guys.
As always.
Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Nice